She was promised to a man she feared, but nothing could prepare her for the moment she discovered the truth about who he really was. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden fort, casting sharp shadows across the dusty parade ground. It was the summer of 1872, and Fort Bowie stood as a lonely outpost in Apache territory, a fragile symbol of American expansion into lands that had belonged to the native tribes for generations. Inside the commandant's quarters, 23-year-old Emily Hartford stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the rough-hewn table. "You cannot be serious, Colonel," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of her own racing heartbeat. Her green eyes, usually bright with intelligence and curiosity, now reflected pure disbelief. Colonel Marcus Thornton, a weathered man in his 50s with gray streaking his temples, looked at her with something between pity and stern resolve. "Miss Hartford, I understand this is difficult to comprehend, but the treaty demands it. The Apache chief Dakota has requested a white woman as a bride for his greatest warrior, Kitchi. It is the price of peace. Without this union, the raids will continue, and more lives will be lost on both sides." Emily's father, Dr. Jonathan Hartford, stood beside her, his face pale and drawn. He had brought his daughter to this frontier post 6 months ago, believing his medical skills could help both the soldiers and the surrounding settlements. Never had he imagined it would lead to this moment. "There must be another way, Colonel. Emily is educated, refined. She came here to teach the children at the fort, not to be bartered like livestock." The colonel's jaw tightened. "Doctor, I have spent 3 years trying to broker peace with the Apache. 3 years of bloodshed, of ambushes, of burned homesteads and murdered families. Dakota has finally agreed to terms, but only if we honor this one condition. His warrior Kitchi lost his entire family in a cavalry raid 5 years ago. The chief believes that by giving him a white bride, it will create a bond between our peoples, a bridge that cannot be easily burned." Emily's mind reeled. She had heard the name Kitchi whispered in fearful tones around the fort. The Apache warrior was legendary, a man who moved through the desert like a shadow, who had single-handedly defended his village from attacks, who was said to be as fierce as the desert storms, and as unforgiving as the scorched earth itself. The soldiers called him the Ghost because he could appear and disappear without warning, leaving only death in his wake. "When?" Emily managed to ask, her voice stronger now, though her insides felt like water. 3 days, the colonel replied. "Chief Dakota will send an escort to bring you to their camp in the Dragoon Mountains. The ceremony will take place there, according to Apache custom." That night, Emily lay awake in her small quarters, staring at the ceiling beams, while tears streamed silently down her temples. She thought of her life back in Boston, of the literary society she had belonged to, of the quiet afternoons reading poetry in her mother's garden. Her mother had died 2 years ago, and her father, consumed by grief, had accepted this posting to escape the memories. Now Emily would pay the price for his need to flee. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and whispered conversations. The other women at the fort looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and relief that it was not them. Mrs. Patterson, the commandant's wife, helped her pack a small trunk with essential items, including several practical dresses, though Emily suspected Apache life would have little use for Boston fashion. "They say he never speaks," Mrs. Patterson told her quietly as she folded a woolen shawl. "Kitchi, I mean. Not since his family was killed. Some say the trauma stole his voice. Others say he simply chooses silence because he has nothing left to say to this world." Emily absorbed this information, adding it to the fragmentary picture she had of the man who would become her husband. A silent warrior bearing unspeakable pain. In a strange way, she understood. Her own grief over her mother's death had left her wordless for months. On the morning of the 3rd day, Emily dressed in a simple blue cotton dress and braided her long auburn hair. Her father accompanied her to the fort gates, his eyes red from sleepless nights. "I will find a way to bring you back," he promised, gripping her hands tightly. "I swear to you, Emily, this will not be forever." But Emily had made her own quiet resolution during those sleepless nights. If this marriage could truly bring peace, if it could spare other families the loss and suffering that war brought, then perhaps it had meaning. Perhaps her sacrifice could matter. She kissed her father's weathered cheek and whispered, "Do not blame yourself. We make the choices we can live with." The Apache escort arrived precisely at dawn. 5 warriors on painted horses, their faces impassive and unreadable. They did not speak to her, did not acknowledge her father's presence. One of them, a younger warrior with kind eyes, simply gestured for her to mount the horse they had brought for her. Emily had learned to ride during her months at the fort, though never with such a light saddle and simple reins. The journey into the Dragoon Mountains took most of the day. The landscape transformed around them, the flat desert giving way to rocky canyons and hidden valleys where water still flowed in secret streams. Emily found herself mesmerized by the harsh beauty of this land, so different from the gentle green hills of Massachusetts. Here, survival itself seemed like an act of defiance against the elements. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, they arrived at the Apache camp. It was larger than Emily had expected, with dozens of traditional wiki-ups arranged in careful patterns, smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing near the stream that cut through the valley. Women looked up from their work, their faces curious but not hostile. This was a living community, not the savage wilderness outpost she had feared. Chief Dakota emerged from the largest wiki-up, an imposing figure despite his advancing years. His face was lined with the map of a hard life, but his eyes held a sharp intelligence that reminded Emily of her university professors. He studied her for a long moment before speaking in heavily accented but clear English. "You are brave to come, white woman. This I did not expect." "I came because I was told it would bring peace," Emily replied, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I came because I believe that understanding between peoples is possible, even in the darkest times." Something shifted in the chief's expression, a softening around his eyes. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years. Perhaps the spirits guided this choice." He gestured toward the far end of the camp. "Kitchi prepares for the ceremony. He knows of your arrival. Tomorrow, when the sun rises, you will be joined according to our ways." That night, Emily was given a wiki-up near the center of camp and provided with food by an older Apache woman named Halona, whose weathered face held surprising gentleness. Halona spoke no English, but her gestures were kind as she brought Emily roasted venison, cornbread, and cool water from the stream. Emily ate mechanically, her mind focused on the approaching dawn and the mysterious warrior who would become her husband. She stepped outside her temporary dwelling as the stars emerged in the vast desert sky, more numerous and brilliant than she had ever seen in Boston. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light, and for a moment, Emily felt very small beneath its immensity, yet somehow connected to something larger than her own fear and uncertainty. A movement in the shadows caught her attention. There, at the edge of the firelight, stood a figure that could only be Kitchi. He was tall and powerfully built, his long black hair falling past his shoulders, his face partially obscured by the darkness. But even from this distance, Emily could sense something emanating from him, a combination of strength and profound isolation that made her chest tighten with unexpected emotion. He did not approach, did not speak. He simply stood there, watching her with an intensity that she could feel like heat from the sun. Emily found herself unable to look away, caught in this strange moment of silent acknowledgement. They were two souls bound by circumstances neither had chosen, each carrying burdens the other could not yet understand. Finally, Kitchi turned and disappeared into the night, moving with the fluid grace of a predator. Emily released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Tomorrow she would marry this enigmatic warrior. Tomorrow her life would change in ways she could not yet imagine. But tonight, beneath the stars of this wild land, she made herself a promise. She would approach this new life with courage, with openness, and with the determination to see the human being behind the fearsome legend. The ceremony began at dawn, just as Chief Dakota had promised. Emily was awakened by Halona, who brought her a traditional Apache wedding dress made of soft deerskin, adorned with intricate beadwork and patterns of turquoise and red. The older woman's hands were gentle as she helped Emily dress, braiding her auburn hair and weaving small white feathers into the plaits. Despite the language barrier, Emily felt a motherly kindness in Helena's touch that steadied her trembling hands. As the first rays of sunlight painted the mountain peaks gold, Emily was led to a clearing at the heart of the camp. The entire tribe had gathered in a circle, their faces solemn and expectant. Chief Dakota stood at the center, wearing ceremonial regalia decorated with eagle feathers and bear claws, and beside him stood Kitchi. In the full light of morning, Emily saw him clearly for the first time. He was perhaps 30 years old, with strong, handsome features that would have been striking were it not for the deep sadness that seemed carved into every line of his face. His eyes, dark as obsidian, held a haunted quality that made Emily's heart constrict with sympathy. He wore traditional Apache warrior clothing, simple but dignified, and around his neck hung a single turquoise stone on a leather cord. Their eyes met across the clearing, and Emily saw something flicker in his expression, a brief moment of surprise, perhaps at finding her less frightened than he had expected. She walked toward him with her head held high, refusing to show the terror that churned in her stomach. If she must do this, she would do it with dignity. Chief Dakota began speaking in Apache, his voice carrying across the assembled tribe. Though Emily could not understand the words, she recognized the cadence of ritual, of sacred promises being spoken into existence. An elder woman stood nearby, translating quietly into English for Emily's benefit. "The chief says that marriage is the joining of two paths into one," the woman murmured. "He says that though you come from different worlds, you will now walk together, learning each other's ways, carrying each other's burdens. He says that Kitchi has known great suffering, and perhaps the spirits have sent you to help heal wounds that run deeper than flesh." Kitchi's jaw tightened at these words, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the gathered crowd. Emily wondered if he resented this arrangement as much as she did, if he too felt like a pawn in a larger political game. The ceremony continued with the exchange of symbolic gifts. Emily was given a beautifully woven blanket, representing the warmth and shelter of family. She, in turn, was instructed to offer Kitchi a bowl of water and cornmeal, representing her commitment to sustain and nourish. As she held out the bowl, her hands shaking slightly, Kitchi finally looked directly at her. What she saw in his eyes took her breath away. Not anger or resentment, but a profound weariness, the exhaustion of a soul that had endured too much. And beneath that, something else, a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even the faintest hint of hope. He took the bowl from her hands, his fingers briefly brushing hers, and Emily felt a strange jolt of connection, as if in that moment they had acknowledged each other as fellow sufferers in this strange arrangement. Chief Dakota concluded the ceremony by binding their hands together with a long strip of leather, symbolizing their union. "You are now husband and wife," the translator said. "May you find strength in each other, and may this union bring the peace our peoples desperately need." The tribe erupted in traditional celebration, with drums beginning to beat and voices rising in song. But Emily and Kitchi stood in the center of it all, their hands still bound, looking at each other with a mixture of uncertainty and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. When the leather was finally removed, Kitchi gestured for Emily to follow him. He led her away from the celebration, through the camp to a wiki set slightly apart from the others. It was larger than most, well constructed, with animal hides hanging at the entrance. This, Emily realized, would be their home. Inside, the dwelling was sparse but clean. There were sleeping furs arranged on one side, a small fire pit in the center, and various tools and weapons hung carefully on the frame. What surprised Emily most were the small touches that spoke of a life lived before tragedy. A beautiful clay pot decorated with geometric patterns, a flute carved from wood, a collection of smooth river stones arranged in a careful spiral. Kitchi stood near the entrance, his massive frame seeming to fill the space. Emily could feel the tension radiating from him, the awkwardness of two strangers suddenly forced into the most intimate of relationships. She decided to break the silence, even if he could not or would not respond. "I know you do not speak," she said softly, her voice gentle, "and I do not expect you to. but I want you to know that I understand loss. My mother died 2 years ago, and there were months when I could not find words for my grief. Silence is sometimes the only honest response to unbearable pain. Something changed in Kitchi's posture, a subtle relaxation of his shoulders. He looked at her with those haunted eyes, and Emily saw a flash of recognition, the acknowledgement of one wounded soul to another. He moved to a corner of the wiki and retrieved a folded blanket, which he placed on the ground, creating a separate sleeping area. Then he pointed to the furs, indicating that she should take the more comfortable space. "Thank you," Emily said, surprised by this gesture of consideration. "You are kinder than the stories told of you at the fort." Kitchi's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile, bitter and sad. He settled onto his blanket, his back against the wiki frame, and closed his eyes, effectively ending the conversation. Emily lay down on the furs, her mind racing with the surreal reality of her new life. The days that followed established a strange rhythm. Kitchi would rise before dawn and disappear into the mountains, hunting or scouting. Emily could not be sure. She spent her time with Helona and the other women, learning to prepare food the Apache way, to tan hides, to identify which desert plants were edible and which were poisonous. The women were initially reserved, but as Emily showed genuine interest in their ways and worked alongside them without complaint, they began to warm to her. In the evenings, Kitchi would return, usually carrying game or gathered wood. He never spoke, but Emily noticed small kindnesses, a particularly choice piece of meat set aside for her, firewood arranged so she could easily reach it, a new blanket appearing on her sleeping furs as the desert nights grew colder. These silent gestures spoke more than words could have. Emily, for her part, began leaving small offerings of her own. She would prepare meals using the techniques Helona taught her, always ensuring Kitchi's portion was generous. She learned which herbs he preferred and would add them to the stew. She noticed his flute gathering dust and carefully cleaned it, placing it where he would see it. She mended his clothing when it tore, her Boston needlework skills proving useful in this unexpected context. 2 weeks into their marriage, Emily woke in the middle of the night to the sound of distressed breathing. In the dim glow of the dying fire, she saw Kitchi caught in the grip of a nightmare, his body rigid, sweat beading on his forehead, his lips moving soundlessly as if screaming in his sleep. Without thinking, she moved to his side and gently touched his shoulder. "Kitchi," she whispered, "you are safe. It is only a dream." His eyes flew open, wild and disoriented. For a moment, Emily feared he might strike out in his confusion, but then recognition dawned. He stared at her, his chest heaving, and she saw tears on his face, the first crack in his stoic armor. Emily's heart broke for him, for the pain he carried in silence, for the nightmares that gave him no peace even in sleep. Acting on pure instinct, she sat beside him and began to sing softly, a lullaby her mother had sung to her as a child. The melody was gentle and soothing, and she sang it in English, the words speaking of safety and comfort and love. She did not know if Kitchi understood the words, but she hoped he might understand the intention behind them. As she sang, she watched his breathing slowly return to normal, watched the tension leave his body. When the song ended, they sat in silence, the fire crackling softly between them. Then Kitchi did something that shocked her. He reached out and gently touched her hand, just for a moment, a gesture of gratitude so profound it needed no words. From that night forward, something shifted between them. Kitchi began staying in the wiki more often in the evenings, sitting by the fire while Emily read aloud from the one book she had brought with her, a collection of poetry. He would listen intently, his eyes focused on her face, though she could not tell how much he understood. Sometimes she would look up to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher, something between wonder and sorrow. One afternoon, nearly a month into their marriage, Emily was gathering water from the stream when she heard shouting from the camp. She ran back to find the tribe in an uproar. A young Apache boy, no more than 10 years old, had been bitten by a rattlesnake while playing in the rocks. The child was already showing signs of severe poisoning, his legs swelling grotesquely, his breathing labored. Emily's medical knowledge, learned from years of assisting her father, suddenly became precious. She pushed through the crowd and knelt beside the boy, examining the bite. I need a knife, clean water, and cloth for bandages, she commanded, her voice taking on the authority of a doctor's daughter. Quickly. The tribe members hesitated, looking to Chief Dakota for guidance. The chief nodded, and suddenly people were moving, bringing her what she needed. Emily worked swiftly, making a small incision to help drain the venom, cleaning the wound, applying a poultice of herbs she had learned could help counteract snake venom. She elevated the boy's leg and kept him as calm as possible, speaking to him in soft, reassuring tones even though he could not understand her words. Kitchi appeared at her side, having heard the commotion. He watched her work with intense focus, then suddenly disappeared. Emily was too busy to wonder where he had gone. She stayed with the boy through the night, monitoring his condition, changing his bandages, keeping him hydrated. Helona sat with her, bringing food and water, her weathered face creased with worry for the child. Just before dawn, Kitchi returned carrying plants Emily had never seen before. He knelt beside her and began crushing the roots between stones, mixing them with water to create a paste. He gestured for her to apply it to the boy's wound. Emily hesitated only a moment before trusting his knowledge. This was his land, his people. He would know the healing plants better than anyone. The paste worked. By midday, the swelling had begun to recede, and the boy's fever broke. By evening, he was sitting up and asking for food. The tribe erupted in grateful celebration, and Emily found herself embraced by women who had been strangers just weeks before. But it was Kitchi's reaction that moved her most. He stood apart from the celebration, watching her with those dark eyes, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw his expression fully unguarded. There was admiration there, respect, and something deeper that made her heart skip unexpectedly. When their eyes met across the crowd, he placed his hand over his heart in a gesture that needed no translation. That night marked a turning point in their relationship that neither could deny. When they returned to their wiki-up, Kitchi did not immediately retreat to his corner, as had become his habit. Instead, he stood in the center of the dwelling, his eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then, slowly and deliberately, he began to speak, his voice rusty from years of disuse, each word seeming to cost him tremendous effort. "You saved him," he said in heavily accented English, his voice deep and rough like stones grinding together. "The boy. He is my brother's son, my last family." Emily's hand flew to her mouth in shock, not just at hearing his voice for the first time, but at the significance of what he had revealed. The child she had saved was not just any tribal member. He was Kitchi's nephew, his last living connection to the family he had lost. Tears sprang to her eyes as she understood the weight of what had transpired. "I did not know," she whispered. "I would have saved him regardless, but I am so deeply glad I could help your family." Kitchi moved closer, his movements careful, as if approaching a frightened deer. 5 winters passed. The cavalry came to our winter camp. They said we had raided their settlements, but we had not. We were peaceful, hunting, preparing for the cold months. His voice cracked, and he paused, gathering strength to continue. "They killed everyone. My wife, heavy with our child. My mother, my father, my sisters. I was hunting in the mountains. When I returned, there was only smoke and blood and silence." Emily's tears flowed freely now, her heart breaking for the unimaginable horror he had endured. "Kitchi, I am so sorry. No words can heal such wounds. My brother survived because he was with another hunting party," Kitchi continued, his words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken inside him. "But he died 2 years ago from the white man's sickness, the spotted disease. He left his son, little Nahuel. The boy is all I have left of my family, all that remains of my blood in this world." He sank to his knees before her, and Emily was startled to see this powerful warrior, this feared ghost of the Apache, looking at her with such raw vulnerability. "When Chief Dakota told me I must marry a white woman for peace, I hated the idea. I hated all white people for what they had taken from me. I thought I would fulfill the duty and nothing more, that I would give you shelter but never my heart, for my heart was buried with my family." "And now?" Emily asked softly, kneeling before him so they were at eye level. Kitchi reached out and gently cupped her face with his calloused hand, his touch surprisingly tender. "Now I see that hate is a poison that destroys the vessel that carries it. You came here frightened but brave. You learned our ways without complaint. You worked beside our women as an equal. And today, you saved the last piece of my heart without even knowing what you held in your hands." Emily leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. "I came here believing I was a sacrifice for peace, a political pawn. But these weeks with you, watching you carry your pain with such dignity, seeing your small kindnesses even when you thought I did not notice, I have come to admire you, Kitchi. Your strength is not in your silence or your fearsome reputation, but in your ability to continue living despite unbearable loss." "You see me," Kitchi said, wonder in his voice. "Truly see me, not the ghost, not the savage warrior, but the man beneath the legend." "And you see me," Emily replied, her voice thick with emotion. "Not as the enemy, not as an obligation, but as someone who might understand your pain because I carry my own." They stayed like that for a long moment, kneeling face to face, hands intertwined, two wounded souls recognizing their reflection in each other. Then, slowly, Kitchi leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture of intimacy and trust that made Emily's heart soar. "I want to try," he whispered, "to open my heart again, to let you in, to build something real between us. It frightens me more than any battle I have faced." "I am frightened too," Emily admitted. "But I have learned that the most worthwhile things in life often require courage. And I believe we could be something worthwhile, Kitchi. Not because a treaty demanded it, but because we choose it." That night, they slept side by side for the first time, not as strangers forced together by circumstance, but as two people tentatively reaching for connection. Kitchi held Emily gently, as if she were something precious and fragile, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, a sound that spoke of life continuing despite everything. The following weeks brought changes that rippled through the entire Apache camp. Kitchi began speaking again, not freely or easily, but enough that the tribe rejoiced to hear their silent warrior's voice once more. He taught Emily to ride in the Apache style, to track animals through the desert, to read the signs of coming weather in the clouds and wind. She taught him more English, read him poetry by the fire, and shared stories of her life in Boston that made him laugh. A sound so rare and beautiful, it made her treasure each occurrence. Chief Dakota watched their growing bond with satisfaction, seeing in their union the possibility of genuine understanding between their peoples. But the peace was fragile, and both Kitchi and Emily knew it. There were members of the tribe who still viewed her with suspicion, and reports came regularly of settlers and cavalry forces who saw the Apache as nothing more than obstacles to expansion. 2 months into their marriage, a crisis arose that would test everything they had built. A young Apache warrior named Delson, who had lost his own family to cavalry violence, began advocating for renewed raids against white settlements. He argued that the peace treaty was a trick, that the whites would never honor Apache sovereignty, and that they should strike first before being destroyed. Delson's words found fertile ground among some of the younger warriors who had known nothing but conflict. Tensions in the camp rose dangerously, with Chief Dakota struggling to maintain unity. Emily could feel the hostile glances directed at her, the whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. She was once again a symbol, but now of division rather than peace. One evening, Delson confronted Kitchi directly outside their wiki up, his voice loud enough for half the camp to hear. "You have forgotten our dead, forgotten your own family, all for the warmth of a white woman's bed. You dishonor their memory." Emily watched from the wiki-up entrance, her heart pounding, as Kitchi stood to face the younger warrior. For a moment she feared violence, but Kitchi's response was measured and powerful in its restraint. "I have forgotten nothing," Kitchi said, his voice carrying across the camp with undeniable authority. "Every day I remember my wife's smile, my mother's songs, my father's wisdom. Every night I see their faces in my dreams. But I also remember that they died because of hate and misunderstanding, because two people saw each other only as enemies, never as human beings with families and hopes and fears." He gestured toward Emily. "This woman, she could have come here full of prejudice and fear, treating us as savages beneath her. Instead, she learned our ways, healed our children, and showed me that not all whites are the same, just as we are not all the same. She gave me back my voice, Delson. She gave me a reason to hope that my nephew might grow up in a world where Apache and white can coexist. Delson's face twisted with anger and pain. Pretty words, but the cavalry does not care about coexistence. They want our land, our destruction. Then we prove them wrong, Emily said, stepping forward to stand beside her husband, her voice clear and strong despite her fear. We show them that peace is possible, that understanding can grow between peoples. Yes, there are those on both sides who want only war, but if we surrender to that thinking, then everyone loses everything. She looked around at the gathered tribe members, her green eyes blazing with passion. I know I am an outsider here, a white woman in an Apache camp, but I have learned your language, your customs, your stories. I have seen your humanity, your love for your families, your connection to this land. And I carry that knowledge back to my people through letters to my father, through my very existence here as proof that we are not so different after all. Chief Dakota stepped forward, his weathered face grave but approving. The white woman speaks wisdom. Kitchi speaks wisdom. We have lost much to the conflict, but we will lose everything if we cannot find a path forward that does not lead to our extinction. The whites are many, like stars in the sky. We are few. Strength alone will not save us, but perhaps understanding might. The crisis did not resolve immediately, but Emily's words and Kitchi's public defense of their union began to shift opinions. Over the following weeks, she worked tirelessly to prove herself a true member of the tribe. Not just Kitchi's wife, but a contributing member of the community. She used her father's medical knowledge to help the sick, taught some of the children English, so they might better negotiate with white authorities, and demonstrated through her actions that loyalty and love were not bound by the color of one's skin. Kitchi, emboldened by her courage, began taking a more active role in tribal leadership, working with Chief Dakota to establish better communication with the fort and surrounding settlements. His reputation as a fearsome warrior gave his advocacy for peace unexpected weight. When Kitchi spoke of finding ways to coexist, people listened, because they knew he had earned the right to speak through his own suffering and survival. 3 months after their marriage, Emily received a letter from her father, delivered by an Apache scout who maintained contact with the fort. Dr. Hartford wrote of his relief at hearing she was well, of the changes he had observed in attitudes at Fort Bowie, as word spread of the peaceful integration happening in the Apache camp. He also wrote of his plan to visit, to see his daughter, and to offer his medical services to the tribe as a gesture of goodwill. Emily read the letter to Kitchi that evening, tears streaming down her face as she realized how much her father's acceptance meant. Kitchi held her close, his own eyes bright with emotion as he understood that this was another bridge being built, another connection strengthening the fragile peace. Your father is a brave man, Kitchi said softly, stroking her hair. To trust his daughter to people he has been taught to fear, to reach out in friendship despite the risk. He raised a daughter of great courage. I see where you learned it. Emily looked up at her husband, this man who had traveled such a long journey from silent, grieving warrior to someone capable of hope and love again. And you are brave to let yourself feel again, to risk your heart after losing so much. We are both brave, Kitchi, and together we are building something that matters. That night, as they lay together under the firs, Kitchi spoke of the future in a way he never had before. He spoke of teaching their children, when they came, both Apache and white ways, of raising them to be bridges between worlds. He spoke of the home they would build together, of growing old side by side, of healing the wounds that war had carved into both their peoples. Emily listened, her heart full to bursting, and realized that what had begun as a forced political arrangement had transformed into something profound and real. She had found love in the last place she expected, with a man who had seemed beyond love's reach, and in doing so, they had both discovered that healing was possible even after the deepest wounds. When her father visited 2 weeks later, he found his daughter transformed, confident and capable, moving through the Apache camp with the ease of someone who belonged. He saw the way Kitchi looked at her, with reverence and love, and the way she looked back, with equal devotion. Dr. Hartford stayed for a week, offering his medical expertise and building relationships with Chief Dakota and the tribal elders, further cementing the alliance that his daughter's marriage had initiated. On his last evening in camp, as he prepared to return to Fort Bowie, Dr. Hartford took Emily's hands in his. "I see now that what I thought was a tragedy was actually a gift," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have found something here I never could have given you in Boston. You have found purpose, belonging, and love. I am so proud of you, my dear girl." Emily embraced her father tightly. "I will visit you at the fort when I can, and you must come here often. You are always welcome in our home, father. Always." As the seasons turned and winter approached, Emily and Kitchi's marriage became a living symbol of the possibility of peace. Young Nahuel, the nephew Kitchi had nearly lost, grew strong and healthy under their care, calling Emily aunt with the easy acceptance of childhood. The tribal elders, seeing the genuine love between Kitchi and Emily, began to soften their resistance to cooperation with white authorities, recognizing that coexistence did not mean the loss of Apache identity. One cold December evening, as snow dusted the mountain peaks and the desert air turned crisp, Emily sat by the fire working on beadwork that Halona had taught her. Kitchi entered the wiki up carrying firewood, his breath misting in the cold air. He set down the wood and came to sit beside his wife, pulling her close against his warmth. "I have something to tell you," Emily said, looking up at him with eyes that sparkled with joy and anticipation. "I have been to see the medicine woman, and she confirms what I suspected. We are going to have a child, Kitchi. In the spring, you will be a father." For a moment, Kitchi simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, tears began to stream down his face, tears of joy mixed with the release of old grief. He pulled Emily into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing in the world, which to him she was. "A child," he whispered, his voice breaking. "New life, new hope. Thank you, Emily. Thank you for giving me back my future." Emily held him as he wept, this strong warrior who had learned it was not weakness to feel, to love, to hope. She thought of the terrified girl who had stood in Colonel Thornton's office months ago, certain she was being sent to her doom, and marveled at the journey that had brought her here, to this moment of perfect happiness in the arms of the man she loved. Outside their wiki-up, the stars blazed in the desert sky, the same stars that had witnessed so much suffering and loss, now bearing witness to healing and renewal. The path ahead would not be easy. There would still be challenges, conflicts between their peoples, prejudices to overcome. But Emily and Kitchi had proven that love could bridge even the widest divides, that understanding could grow in the harshest soil, and that hope could flourish even in hearts that had known devastating loss. As winter settled over the Dragoon Mountains, the Apache camp and Fort Bowie maintained an uneasy but genuine peace, built on the foundation of one forced marriage that had become a true union of hearts. And in the wiki-up set slightly apart from the others, a warrior who had lost everything, and a woman who had sacrificed everything held each other close, grateful for the unexpected gift they had found in each other, and dreaming of the future they would build together. One day, one choice, one act of love at a time. The story that had begun with fear and obligation had transformed into something beautiful and redemptive. They had been forced together by the demands of peace, but they stayed together by choice, by love, and by the shared belief that their union represented something larger than themselves. They were proof that even in the darkest times, even after the most profound losses, the human heart remained capable of extraordinary courage, forgiveness, and love. And as spring approached, bringing with it new life in the form of their child, Emily and Kitchi looked forward to their future together, no longer as strangers bound by treaty, but as partners, lovers, and soulmates who had found in each other exactly what they needed to heal and to hope again.